Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about Ghost Boys by Jewell Parker Rhodes. And a little bit first, I guess, is how this book got on my radar. I take my English classes to the library every couple weeks, our school library, so they can get a chance to see the new books out and hopefully find something to read that interests them. A few months ago, one of my students came back with this book, Ghost Boys, and it looks super interesting. I didn't really know much about it, but I also conference with my students, and so every once in a while I would talk with him for a few minutes about what he was reading, and it sounded like a great book, but I just had so many other books that I was reading and worried about, so I didn't get around to reading it until just a few weeks ago when I was at the library looking for something to read right before Thanksgiving break. And so I saw this was available, so I picked it up. So just a quick summary. Sorry, I'm a little sick. So if you hear me sniffling and clearing my throat, that's what's up. But it's a story about a 12-year-old boy named Jerome. And sorry, a little bit of spoilers, not really. It's at the very beginning of the book. Jerome is shot by a police officer who thought that his toy gun was a real gun, which, if I'm not mistaken, is something that has actually happened recently here in the United States within the past few years. It's not crazy to think of this actually happening. But anyway, as far as Jerome's story, we interact with him as a ghost. He's a ghost, and he gets to see how his death and the aftermath of that, as far as the trial of the police officer, of trying to decide if he should be charged with murder, and all of this we're seeing from Jerome's perspective as a ghost. So that's kind of really interesting. But while Jerome is a ghost, he also meets first of all, he meets the daughter of the police officer. For some reason, she can see him in his ghost form. And so she's kind of dealing with her father's actions, and she's trying to understand why it happened and why she's grappling with the father that she knows and loves and the man who killed someone who was her age. But Jerome also meets another ghost who we find out later is Emmett Till. And so if you aren't familiar with who Emmett Till is, I actually didn't find out who Emmett Till was until I was in college, which I feel like says a lot about some of the things that we're presented with in our education system and that we need to be better at. But anyway, I actually found out about Emmett Till when I was doing my pre-service program, trying to become a teacher, and one of the classes I was observing at a junior high just south of here was reading a nonfiction book as a class called Getting Away with Murder, The True Story of the Emmett Till Case. And it's actually by Chris Crow, who is a professor in the English teaching department at BYU, which is where I went to school. And I never actually got to have a class from him. Our paths just never crossed. But I've been around him in the same circles and things like that. Great author. And this book was fascinating as I was following along with this junior high class and as they were learning about it. But anyway, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy, black boy in 1955, who was brutally beaten to death in the South when he was visiting family down there because he had allegedly whistled at a white woman. Anyway, it was fascinating for me to learn about this a few years ago. And anyway, sorry, this video is all over the place. I just have so many thoughts about this book because despite the fact that it's it's hard to know if it's, it looks like most of the awards that it's won are for middle grade. So just knowing that this book grapples with such hard topics while being a middle grade book. And I posted a few weeks ago about how I feel like middle grade books are some of the most important for tackling these hard topics. And because these kids are capable of understanding these hard things, and they are surrounded by them all the time with grief, with divorce, death, and for a lot of my students, racism. And so I have so many students who've loved some of the other books that I've included in my classroom library, being, On the Come Up, or some of the other books. I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. So any of these that deal with identity, race, and prejudice, some of my students just latch onto these books. And I felt like Ghost Boys was a great book for me to reflect on some of the things that have happened in the United States in the past several years, problems that we're still having in terms of police brutality, things like that. And, as myself not being a minority, it can be hard for me to relate and express these things to my students. So that's why I feel that having books like this, like Ghost Boys, like I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, like On the Come Up, and all of these amazing books by authors who have dealt with these things, is so important. I try to include them whenever I can in my classroom library, when I give book talks to my students, and I've seen that they are in our school libraries, which is fantastic. So I know my thoughts were a little bit all over the place, but I highly recommend this book. It's pretty short. It's only about 200 pages, but it was so powerful and really allowed me to reflect on my feelings, and something that I would recommend to my students. The one student I had, he seemed to really enjoy it as well. And so I recommend it for anyone looking for some really good, I'd say it's realistic fiction despite the fact that it has ghosts. And just anybody looking to reflect and learn. You learn a little bit about Emmett Till and learn about people who may have different perspectives and are experiencing life in a different way than you. So I encourage you to check it out on your own. I'll put a link on my blog post for where you can purchase a copy. And I thank you for listening to my ramblings about Ghost Boys by Jewell Parker Rhodes.